live streamed.
So that's live stream, and I'll just set record and then we're good to go.
Okay.
Okay.
Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's well. Starting to see we've turned a corner here and the sun's shining, so we need to grasp the positives as much as we possibly can at this moment in time. Just before we start business, I'd like to welcome Debbie McRae to our committee this morning. This is Debbie as our new Falkirk's new pensions manager. This is our first committee meeting, so thanks, Debbie, and it's good to have you on board. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Apologies.
I have one apology, convener, from Provost Buchanan.
Great. Any declarations of interest? No. Great. Moving on to item 3, which is the minute of our last meeting. Any inaccuracies? No.
No.
Agree the minute?
Agreed.
Any matters arising? No. Great. See, when we were saying earlier about getting finished before 1 o'clock, I don't really want to be finished before 10:30 though. Item 4, that's the pension fund, and Brian's going to take that one. Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, convener, and good morning to all. On the back of your last comments, I'll wax lyrical about this report, try and stretch it out. In fact, on the contrary, I'll be very concise and leave it to EY coming in behind me to speak to what in effect is their report. But I'll just pick out a few particular points in the covering report. So if we jump to the bottom of the page, you can see the key milestones there, and maybe just drawing out the 2 directly related to the committee on the 17th of June, where you'll be presented with the unaudited accounts, and then later on in September 23rd, the actual audited accounts. The timeline, as we note in the paragraph at the top of the following page, does accommodate, on the back of COVID, the potential to have an extra month. But certainly we are and will be working towards the normal timeline of end of September, and albeit I have caveated it to some degree, are minded to try and work towards that same deadline. There is a linkage apparently with the council's own accounts, but they have the same timeline, so that shouldn't be an issue. I mentioned an EY caveat there. I would also just draw your attention to further caveats at paragraph 3.7. Paragraph 3.4 just draws out 2 particular significant areas of risk, and they're familiar to us, so they aren't new. In terms of the 4 strands that effectively are the best value strands, and maybe just by way of context, to note that the council, Falkirk Council, will be subject to one of those occasional thorough best value reviews during the course of the year, so that's going to be quite a big deal for us. In terms of previous audit recommendations in section 4, the first one self-evidently has resolved itself as we've worked through the challenges of COVID. And on the second one in para 4.2, this area represents a continuing challenge, but I think we're making steady progress. Just to note that the sister report from internal audit, in terms of their audit plan, will come before you at or for the June meeting. And I think that just takes us back to the recommendation at 2.1, convener.
You're on mute, convener.
The joys of the mute button. I see we've got Olga and Hassan on this morning, so if anyone's got any questions.
Perhaps you might helpfully invite EY to just make some comments on the report, their report themselves, before there's any questions, as a
Certainly.
suggestion.
Thank you. Olga or Hassan? Hassan.
Olga? Yes, I'm just waiting. I think Hassan
Brilliant.
was.
I see his cameras
taken.
went off. Sometimes that means their connections dropped.
Okay, so sorry, Hassan just
go ahead.
messaged me on our Teams saying he having some problems. So I think I will just take you through the report briefly, but Brian pretty much outlined key risk and key considerations. So I guess I just wanted to draw committee's attentions to 3 specific caveats in our planning report. The first one is in relation to materiality. So we outline on page 4 and then subsequently further down in the report our indicative level of planning materiality, which is approximately 1% of the net assets pension fund value of the prior year. This is a drop from 2% that we have used for our materiality figures from prior year. The purpose and the reason for this drop is the benchmark exercise that the firm undertook as part of the prior year, and this just to bring EY position on materiality and use materiality in line with other pension funds across the sector and specifically across Scotland. I want to also mention that at the year end, as part of the usual exercise, we will be looking to update our materiality figures and we'll report to the committee in September what our actual materiality, final materiality used for the audit look like, as obviously prior year figures based on net assets at 31st March 2020, which been a significant drop due to COVID impact last year. So we do expect our materiality figures to be to increase quite significantly anyway. Another area that's not yet agreed at the time of us planning, it's the time of us issuing the report, is audit fees. So as we noted in our audit report, we're still in discussion with management in relation to prior year audit fees. And for the context of current year audit fees, this is still in discussion and in agreement and consultation in consultation with Audit Scotland. So again, we're planning to sort this and update the committee on the actual agreed audit fees figures for 2021 in our September report. And as Brian pointed out, the last caveat, which I don't expect it to be an issue, to be honest, but it's just something we, again, in consultation with Audit Scotland at the moment of us issuing a report, is the timing of our audit opinion. So this is coming from NAO English network, where pension fund audit opinions mention specifically the council audit opinions as administering body. So in England, pension fund accounts are not allowed to be signed until the council audit is completed. We're conscious that pension fund audit committee scheduled is in September, and while there's been an extension by the Audit Scotland deadlines, the pension fund is looking to get the account signed in line with the previously agreed original timeline. This is our intention as well at the moment, and I know obviously the same extension applies to the council. So we were just hoping, in line with prior year, we should be able to sign this off on time in September, and we've been allowed and granted this permission by the firm, by EY, last year. However, given this something coming from external network in England, so we just need Audit Scotland approval for that. But again, I can see that Audit Scotland approval and approvals in Scotland doesn't actually mention council as a specific administering body, so it doesn't actually depend on conclusion of the council and like having council account signed. So it's not an issue from that perspective. So again, we will consult with Audit Scotland and we'll report to the committee in September, but we don't really anticipate it to be an issue. It's just something to flag at this stage. I don't really have anything else to flag. Brian, I think, outlined pretty much all the recommendation and the progress made. All significant risks are still in place and similar to prior year. So I'm happy to take any questions. And Hassan, I can see you joined back. So if you, I don't know, like if you have anything else to add, or like if you hear what's
happening. My network has failed. So I keep getting kicked out of the meeting. So I've only just joined now when Olga's completed the presentation, but happy to take any questions which members may have.
Okay, has members got any questions?
Can I ask a question, Viviana?
Certainly.
It's on page 18 and it's regarding responsible investment. As you know, we periodically get messages from people interested in the green movement. It says here the pension fund will be expected to continue to work with its managers in promoting sustainable investments, and it refers to us joining a couple of climate change bodies. I know no one's got a crystal ball completely, but at what point does gas and oil become unsustainable investments? It seems to be heading in that direction, but does anybody have a forecast?
It is something that the committee and obviously pensions have been working on. There's some information further on in our reports, but if Hassan or Olga have got any comments on that?
In terms of sustainable investments, then that's obviously a decision for yourselves in line with your investment strategies in terms of what you consider as an organisation is the right thing for yourself. So we'll be looking at how your investments agrees with your investment strategy in respect of that. But it is an issue which is facing a number of organisations as they think about what they want to do in terms of their investment strategies.
We do have a particular interest because of the refinery being in Falkirk and sustaining thousands of jobs. It's just something extra that we have to consider.
Yeah, I think like everything, it's a balancing act all the time, Pat. But I think some of the organisations that we have joined, and the fact that we believe as a committee that it's better to be in it, to change it. That often the pressures that we could put on from within, but it's as things get worse and worse through climate change, then it's something that we have to be constantly reviewing.
Okay, thank you, Convener. Okay.
Simon?
Yeah, a question for, I guess for Brian, actually. Olga was good enough to point out that there's nothing in there at the moment for fees. and that there's still an unresolved issue relating to the 1920 fees. So just a question really on what's the difficulty in resolving the historic fee, and also, at the moment we're just presented with TBD for all of the fees. Is that a blank check, or what are the controls around negotiating a reasonable fee?
Yep. Brian?
Thanks, convener. I mean, I think for last year we just had some issues around the increase in fees, which we do need to conclude. I mean, there is an envelope within which the auditors, in agreement with Audit Scotland, can operate. So there is a degree of latitude, and we've had intermittent discussions, but I think the day job, so to speak, for both of us has intervened from time to time. So it's something, given the lapse of time, that we do need to bring to a conclusion. And the fact that it's inevitably surfaced at this meeting, I think inevitably acts as a further catalyst to just nail a final position, which I would hope would be some kind of compromise. But we'll take that off table, Simon, and we will get to a finalised position. But it's the nature of the beast with fees. We want them, as you do, I'm sure, as low as possible. The auditors have certain drivers that colour the level of fees. So somewhere between these two positions, negotiations will lead to a conclusion, and we will get there imminently. Thanks.
Councillor Patrick?
Thank you, convener. Just a comment on page 18, page 5 of the particular form, but page 18 of our report. It under triennial valuation. I'm presuming, in actual fact, that further comment will be made on that later on during the meeting today. But in the last paragraph, it makes reference to the fund's longer-term strategy. And states that it's been issued to employers and trade unions and will be published by the end of March. I for one, haven't actually knowingly seen that yet. Could you tell me when, in actual fact, we can anticipate getting sight of the strategy as tabled? Thank you.
The fund strategy is on our agenda for today. Brian, have you got any further comment?
I think just to make the comment that following the triennial review, it's an obvious platform for a strategy review, which is underway. We've had the initial meeting with Hyman's involving Lothian and Fife as well as our partners. And work will progress on that. There is mention of it later in the agenda, so we can flesh it out at that point, convener, I think.
Okay.
Thank you, convener. I do apologise. I have made every attempt to read the report in its entirety, but obviously have been shown failing, and look forward to further comment as the meeting progresses. Thank you.
Not at all, John. Thank you. Thanks for your question. Has anyone got any further questions on item 4? No, that's great. Moving on, item 5. And that's with yourself again, Brian.
Yes, convener. This report essentially is an update on both the fund's risk register and the attendant assurance map. So starting off with the objectives in section 3, the first centres on risk awareness. and the second has a focus on risks that may undermine or compromise delivery of the fund's strategic or operational activities. In section 4, turning to the actual review of the risk register in the first instance, just to note process, there's a formal semi-annual meeting of senior officers to review the register, and I think very helpfully the chair of the pension board has the opportunity to sit in on these and to make comment, and I think that's been helpful both ways in terms of assessing the position. In section 5, essentially we outline the core methodology, and in 5.3, just noting some adjustments there, one risk being added in terms of the matter of the merger, which we'll come on to at several points on today's agenda, and a diminution of the Brexit uncertainty. And just picking up on essentially the content, that's concentrated in section 6, and the current areas of greatest risk. There are two categories that have shifted from very high to the lower categorisation. One is succession planning, and the other is around staff errors and backlogs, and that's touched on section 6.1. Section 6.2, you can see yourselves the bullets of the areas that have been identified with the highest risk rating. And then jumping to the assurance map in section 7, which is a relatively recent enhancement in this area, and provides the committee and board with an added independent assurance about key fund risks, and also to demonstrate that internal controls have been dealt with in a systematic manner. And you can see it's structured in para 7.2 in terms of what's categorised as three lines of defence. Kind of conjures up images of trenches in the First World War to some degree, but hopefully in some respects more effective. So if we jump back to the front of the report, you can see the recommendations before you at section 2, convener. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thanks, Brian. Does anyone have any questions? No. I noticed there's a new risk added at the bottom. Section 6.2, cyber attacks. I believe one of our partners has had quite a difficult time with cyber attacks, and we feel that that's something that we've added to that risk. Has anyone got any other comment? Or Simon, and then Pat.
Yeah, this is just a quick one really for the team. Debbie, yourself, perhaps. The assurance map, the risk register and the assurance map obviously go hand in hand with each other. And I was just thinking, actually, when we do the risk register review, it might be good to look at the assurance map at the same time as just part of that regular process.
And going forward at the next meeting you have, I'm assuming, Simon. Okay, that's been noted.
I'll take that on board. So, thank
you. Okay, Councillor Reid.
Yes, thank you, convener. One of the high risks was perhaps insufficient staff, which actually showed a downward trend in risk, but I've always felt that our staff that particular section, like many sections, is under great pressure at the moment. I wonder if Brian could comment further on that. It's shown as a high risk.
Yeah, maybe Debbie.
Or Debbie, sorry.
Would you like to come in?
Convener, if I could maybe just come in initially, and Debbie might come in behind me. I think Councillor Reid makes a very valid point, which does apply to the pension section, but does permeate much wider than that. I mean, and if I just take finance in its broader sense, in the past 5 or 6 years, corporate finance, we're circa 50% staff down on what we had before. So all areas are significantly impacted by resources. And I know, just if you like, anecdotally, the emails I'm exchanging with Debbie late into the evening and over the weekend are some indication of the work pressure that we're facing. But we do, well, we have recruited additional staff consistent with the available establishment, and we do recognise going forward with the significant and diverse workload that may need to be supplemented, and most imminently we're looking to replace Debbie's old post with her promotion, and that will make a difference if we can get somebody in there reasonably soon. So happy for Debbie to come in behind me, who's closer to the wider section staffing position. Thank you, Convener.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Brian. Just really mainly to echo what Brian has said. There's you know, the team has, we did recruit early last year for some posts, which is why the risk has come down a little in the admin side of things. But as always, things are moving on and there's new issues to be dealt with by the section. So the pressure is on most of the time for all of the team. And as Brian said, we're in the process. We had a couple of interviews yesterday, a couple tomorrow for replacing my old post, which hopefully should provide me with a little bit of respite care. So that is in plan. But yeah, the pressure is on. There's lots of issues going around. None of them are going away soon, and so there is pressure on the team to be resourced properly. So we are looking at that and looking at forthcoming issues and seeing if we need further resource on that front as well.
Thanks, Debbie.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer, did you want to question?
Yes, if that's okay. It was around risks number 2 and number 5, and I wondered if you could explain why these 2 risks were seen as going up. So that's on page 47 and 48.
Yeah. Brian, I'm happy to take this one if that's okay. The reason, Jennifer, it was to do with we had a number of small bodies at the time, so they're linked. We had 3 small bodies that asked for deferral of contributions at the time that COVID kicked in, and so at the time of writing the risk register, they weren't all paid. At the time of speaking, they're almost all paid. So I think it was just to reflect that we still had a little bit of risk, but it wasn't a significant financial, but there was a bit of a risk that had increased because of COVID. I would expect that when we look at it in 6 months, these will come back down again, but they were both related to a small number of bodies with a small number of liabilities who had asked for a bit of a deferral on contributions.
So if I just may, obviously the convener alluded to cyber attack, and yes, that was us, as you'll have seen in the news. So we are arranging a meeting with Debbie just to see if there are any ongoing consequences that will impact directly on what Falkirk pension scheme has to produce in a sense accounts, and employer statements, because obviously we've lost data and we're having to recreate our financial records. So just to provide some assurance that we're on the job, and obviously we're going to try and mitigate any impacts onto you.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I know it's been a very difficult time for you and for your colleagues, so I appreciate the update on that. Has anyone else got any other comments or questions? Happy to approve the report? Thank you. Right, moving on to item 6, and that's with the fund strategy statement, and that's with Debbie. Thanks, Debbie.
Thank you, convener. So this item's the funding strategy statement, which we put round as a draft at the September meeting. So this is the framework by which the valuation is done and the employer rates are set, and it is the framework around that. So as a draft version sent to the employers and the unions in October last year, asking for any comment. And we didn't really get anything that required any changes. We did have some comments from the police more around what did it mean about the cost cap issue that was mentioned. So there's no real changes. I think there was a couple of clarifications made with regard to what employers sat in what type. But apart from that, I would say there's no major changes since the September report. Just it is made to make sure that it aligns with the valuation report. Julie West from Hymans is on the line if MD has any specific questions on that as well. Otherwise, look at the recommendations in section 2 being asked to note and approve.
Thanks, Debbie. Julie, would you like to add anything?
No, I was going to say exactly what Debbie just said, which was that we circulated it earlier on in the year. It's been passed around to all of the employers for consultation. We don't normally see very many responses to these types of documents. We've made a couple of updates just in line with changes that were made following discussions with some of the employers and some of the contribution rates that have been agreed. We put into the funding strategy statement some of Alistair's prior knowledge on the history of some of these employers as well. So we've got that record for the next valuation also. But no, really just echoing what Debbie said. This is the rule book, if you like. This is how we set contributions for everybody and how the fund will respond under different circumstances. And also maybe to note, it's not a one-off. We've seen in England and Wales recently quite a lot of reviews to funding strategy statements as we've moved through the valuation cycle with updates in regulations. So we did review it as part of the formal valuation, but that's not to say that we can't come back and review it if necessary as time passes and things change.
Okay, thanks, Julie. Has anyone got any questions or comments? Councillor Reid?
Just one question on page 72. It's possibly more an observation than a question, to be honest. But halfway down the page, depends who you are, and it refers to elected members. You will want to be sure that the council balances the need to hold prudent reserves for retirement and death benefits, which I should declare interest, by the way, with the above and with the other competing demands for council money. It's not an issue that quite often comes before us, where we might have to make such a judgment. And of course, this whole report is the basis for that. But just as the smaller employers are finding it a heavy burden in terms of pension, will come a point when the council has to further review things. I mean, it used to be that I think the percentage was almost in single figures a way back. Now it's creeping up to about 25 and over %.
Has anyone, Debbie or Julie, got any comment to make for Councillor Reid?
Effectively, when you're making each of the valuation decisions, that's in turn going to influence what is paid. So I guess the question for committee is always, are we striking the right balance of risk? So that's why when we present results, we don't just present a single number. We'll say, you know, we're assuming this level of investment return, and that's got, you know, in this case, 70% likelihood of being borne out in practice. So we try to present the results for what is quite a complex process in such a way so that you can understand what that balance of risk is. So how much are you balancing protecting the funds? And obviously you can always choose to protect the funds more, and that then, you know, leaves less money for council services, for example, or you take the opposite view, and you lower the level of risk for the pension fund, and that ultimately lowers the amount of money that you hold and the contributions you pay. So we maybe don't explicitly talk about it in the terms of, you know, an elected member balancing, you know, council funds, for example. But certainly when we're discussing the risk associated with all of the funding decisions, that's the balance that's being made.
Okay.
Okay, thank
Thanks,
you.
Julie. Has anyone else got any other? Don't want to miss anybody. Okay, so can we move to approve? Agree? Yep. I've seen some nodding heads.
Agreed.
Moving on to item 7, and that's with Debbie again, pension fund valuation update.
Thank you, convener. So this is just give an update on the fund valuation, which requires by the regulations to be signed off by the 31st of March, so not long now, along with the funding strategy statement. And so it's just a bit of an update of where we are and how close we are. So very close is the answer. I think as was presented at the December meeting, the funding level for the fund was 94% as at the 31st of March 2020. The feeling is that with asset movements since then, that if we were to do it on the same basis now, we'd be a bit higher than that. However, it's taken at a point in time. So the report also mentions in section 5 various significant events affecting the valuation, the McLeod judgment, the cost cap mechanism, etc. Julie is, after I've spoken, to do a bit of a presentation on the valuation in general, so I'll leave those subjects to her to expand on. And just from the fund's perspective, to let members know that we have engaged with all the employers, and actually because of COVID and being able to do it virtually, we've engaged with bar one, all employers on their employer rates, which has been useful for lots of reasons, to get rates, discuss rates and tell them how they're calculated and why the changes from previous valuations, etc. So I think that's been quite useful for the fund and the employers to do that. And we're at the stage where I think I mentioned in the report that we had one employer who were waiting for a guarantee for. We've now got that, so we are good to go for signing off on the basis that with that small change to the employer rate following the guarantee, we're good to go for signing off on that. And that perspective is it. If I can invite Julie to comment, and I think she's got a presentation as well.
Yes, just a few slides really to summarise what we've done so far, and where we are. And actually things have progressed over the last couple of weeks as well, so things will have moved further on. Just share these. Okay. Okay, can everyone see that okay? So unhelpfully, I can't see you at the same time as I'm sharing these, but if you can let me know if there's any issues.
Everything
Is it
seems
still,
fine.
Is it still on the first? There we go.
Yep.
So really the process that we've done so far, we did the initial training way back on the 13th of August. So talking through how we do the evaluation, what the process is, some of the decisions that committee would have to make. And then following on from that training, we agreed all of the assumptions. As we've just spoken about, we have drafted the funding strategy statement, so that was available quite early on in the process, also to be shared with committee and the employers. We got data from the fund on the 30th of October, where we processed all of the calculations. So we look initially at the whole fund, so what's the fund position look like? And we present results on that and discuss those with the fund officers. So that happened in December. And then we go away once those results are agreed and look at the positions for all of the individual employers in the fund. And we had that discussion with the officers just it was almost the very last day before lots of us were finishing up for Christmas holidays. So we could get communications out to the employers between Christmas and New Year and on their return in January. As Debbie mentioned, we did do employer meetings with all, I think, except one of the fund's employers who declined the opportunity. That was really useful for a lot of reasons. It shows a really high level of engagement and commitment from the fund to the employers, something that's definitely not commonplace around all funds in the country, perhaps because there's a smaller number of employers to engage with, but was really a useful process. There's obviously a lot of changes in personnel between evaluations at employers. So it's really helpful to have that conversation with them directly so that they understand what their pension obligations are, how their contribution rates have been set, and also sometimes what that could mean in the future. So there was a few discussions round about what happens, if I exit, or where the contribution rates were becoming unmanageable, some of the things that we could do to support employers with that. One of the outcomes of those discussions was an employer was able to secure a guarantee from one of the councils, which is a bit of a win-win situation from the fund's perspective. So it means the fund are more have more certainty round about if that anything was to happen in the future with that employer, if they weren't around to meet their pension obligations, there's a council there to back those. And in turn, that means that the fund can give the employer a little bit more leeway in terms of the payment of contributions, and actually use the funds available to that employer to provide the service that they're trying to provide, and not paying a substantially higher contribution rate. So that was a really really useful process, and one that really should be recognised for the value that it brought. At the time of writing, almost all of the employer contribution rates were agreed, but over the last week, that is now all employer contribution rates agreed. So means we can go ahead and finalise the rates and adjustment certificate that sits at the back of the formal valuation report for all of the revised rates that will come into effect from the 1st of April. The funding position, I've just put it in there as a recap. The funding position has increased from 92 to 94%. That is the assumptions under which that funding position has been assessed. So it's worth noting there that that is just a single set of assumptions. We have to rely on one set of assumptions to calculate those liabilities. But when we set contributions, we don't just assume that single set of assumptions. We look at lots of different possibilities for what assets may do in the future. a summary of how contribution rates are looking across the fund. So for the stabilised employers, their contribution rates are all fixed for 2 years and increasing at 0.5% in the 3rd year. That 0.5% is to build in a little bit of a buffer. There's a lot of uncertainty arising from the cost cap valuation, which I'll mention further on. But that was to almost fend off the potential for larger increases at the next valuation if the cost cap valuation results in a significant increase to the benefits that members earn. For admitted bodies, their contribution rates really varied depending on their own individual circumstances, whether they're open or closed, and their time horizon, so the length of time under which we expect them to participate in the fund. In some cases, we had further discussions on that. We looked at extending it out a little bit where we felt that that was a reasonable thing to do to try to keep contribution rates at a manageable level for some of those organisations. And for contractors, for most of those, their contribution rates have decreased. That's because we want to reduce the risk of the fund having to pay out a large exit credit. So if those contractors end their contract with us with a large surplus, then that would be paid back to them now under the regulations. So it means that we want to reduce the risk almost in those cases, reduce the level of contributions such that they're not building up that high surplus, and lots of them are in very good funding positions, so means they can pay less contributions now and use up some of that surplus. A couple of notes on the employers. So the small admitted bodies pool that the fund used to operate, we decided to disband that at this valuation, largely due to the fact that a lot of the employers in that pool were now guaranteed. So a lot of them had left the fund and were guaranteed under the terms of the agreement over the last few years that the 3 councils would stand behind them. As I mentioned earlier, there was a guarantee being sought by one small employer, and that's now been agreed, which allows us to go and finish the signing off their contribution rate. And where there have been closed employers, we've taken the time to make sure that we've got a little bit more engagement with them to help them understand how their contribution rates can move in the future. So typically when an employer's closed, we know at a point in time their last active member will retire, and the fund will be trying to make good any shortfall at that point in time. So the sooner they're able to plan for that and budget, the more time there is for the assets to earn investment returns and plug any gap that might be there. So it's helpful to take the time with those types of employers and help them to plan appropriately and avoid any unexpected surprises at the next formal valuation. So the next steps to finalise the funding strategy statements, that's the document we've just spoken about, sign off the final valuation report by the 31st of March 2021. The government actuary asks for data from the fund for their Section 13 valuation. So that's when they conduct their own valuation and they look at some metrics across all of the funds and to make sure that the valuation has been carried out in line with their principles. They want to make sure that you are setting a funding plan that's appropriate. So it's not pushing the cost of providing these benefits onto future generations of taxpayers, for example. And really make sure that the fund is holding sufficient assets, and they've got a series of metrics that they look at. We typically don't see very many flags being raised from GAD with our funds on that, and we take steps throughout the valuation process, obviously, to make sure that we are setting contribution rates appropriately. But that's maybe one to watch out for when their reports released in due course. We've mentioned the cost cap valuation. That had been ongoing. We thought we might have had an update on that in February. The cost cap valuations that have been carried out in the other public service schemes had showed a decrease in costs due to the methodology that they used to carry out that valuation. A decrease in costs meant that they would have to increase the benefits that members earned in the scheme. So that would be a direct change to something like the accrual rate or the level of employee contributions. So a drop in employee contributions would mean an increase in employer contributions. We now know that that valuation, we won't have the results prior to signing off the valuation. So it's helpful in one respect, it's removed that element of uncertainty. There's also a review of that mechanism itself happening just now, because I think there's a realisation that it's not operating in line with the expectations when that mechanism was put into place. So that's very much a wait and see what happens, and I'm sure we'll be continuing to talk about the outcome of that over the next year or so whenever they release the results of that valuation. And that's all for me, a quick summary of where we are, but happy to take any questions on that.
Thank you, Julie. I see Andy's got his hand up. Just before you come in, Andy, I just want to acknowledge that the employee engagement, although it was a very good exercise, I'd like to recognise at this time that it was a lot of work put into that, and show my thanks and appreciation to the teams that worked very diligently to help and support these smaller employers. Thank you. Andy?
Yeah, it's just in Appendix 2. I was looking at the community admission bodies. If you want to have a look, just further south than halfway, Ballyconrain School. And then if you look again at the fourth bottom row, you'll see Ballyconrain School in there again. I just wonder if it's a double counting that's going on.
Yeah, so there's is that in the funding strategy statement?
It's in page 147.
I don't have the papers, sorry, so I can't double check. Is it the final valuation report and the rates and adjustment certificate, or is it in the funding strategy statement?
It's in the pension fund valuation and employers funding data.
Sorry, I'll jump in here. That was an analysis that the pension fund, it's not appendix to your report, Julie. It was an analysis that the pension fund did, and apologies, that has been included twice in that table. So I'll get that amended. But the idea of the table was just to show what the funding level per employer was on that, and how small the community admission bodies are in relation to the overall fund with the council and the stabilised bodies. We produced that at the last valuation, but apologies, yes, that has been included twice.
Okay, right. Sorry about that. Just popped out because I saw it twice. That was all. Okay.
Yeah. No, thank you for pointing that out.
Thanks, Andy. Anyone else? No. So we've asked to note the report and the progress. Okay, moving on. Agenda item 8. That's for yourself again, Debbie. Thanks, Debbie.
Thank you. This agenda item covers general governance matters. So you will see there's quite a number of matters that have raised, which reflects the number of issues surrounding pension fund and pension fund regulations, etc. So I will pick out a few as we go along, and then let MD ask any questions. The first item I'd like to pick out is in section number 3 is the board appointment. Raymond Smith has joined the board and I noticed that he was managed to join us after the meeting started this morning. So welcome, Raymond. Raymond has joined and has had his induction training last week. So hopefully I've not baffled him too much with that. The next point regarding number 4 is the fund merger, and there's a little bit of outline about that. However, obviously that is a subject of a special meeting on the 22nd of March. So it's just really to highlight that to some extent what's written there is a wee bit of a guide, but it's superseded by the papers for the 22nd of March, to which we hope most members will be able to attend to see the presentation by the consultant. There's also a bit of information updates on current issues, the McLeod and cost cap, which Julie has kindly covered off in the evaluation report. The next point I'd like to highlight is the section 7, the cash management policy. There's a counterparty limit update. When we had internal audit been doing some work and spotted that we had breached the counterparty limit for the Royal Bank of Scotland, but had highlighted, however, that our counterparty limits didn't quite mirror what Treasury, the Council Treasury, were using, and they were using higher limits. So made a recommendation that we should look at increasing those. We've also kind of put a process in place to review those counterparty limits against the Treasury ones every 6 months or so, to make sure that we're aligned with that. So this paper, as highlighted in 2.2, is asking the committee to approve the updated counterparty limits, which are shown in Appendix 1 to this agenda item. And that takes the banks from 8 million to 10 million as a limit. And apart from that, the other thing, possibly the other thing to notice, there's various items which hopefully you had a chance to read, but the National Fraud Initiative, which we take part in, had highlighted, it comes every couple of years, had highlighted 10 deaths that we weren't aware of, 2 deferreds and 8 pensioners. And the team are in process of getting the appropriate certificates, etc., and investigating those. I spoke to Jeanette not long before the call, and there are possibly a couple that we need to look into further that may possibly be fraud cases, but require a bit of further work at the moment to understand that. But suffice to say, the team are on the case and investigating where they can. So I think that's probably a quick whirl around the general governance report, and just refer to recommendations to note the report and to approve the counterparty limits. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Julie. Do we have any questions? Councillor Patrick, I see your hand up. Councillor, you're on mute.
My apologies for that. Thank you. Actually, it's not a direct question in relation to the report that Julie has given under item 8, but I wonder if it would be an appropriate spot for a comment to be introduced regarding the difficulties or the correspondence which perhaps other colleagues have received as well with regard to the environmental issues. Councillor did touch on that in a previous comment, but I just wonder, in actual fact, it would be appropriate to have some comment regarding the approaches that have been made directly to the scheme with regard to the whole issue, particularly the oil and gas issues. Certainly, I know particularly been receiving quite a lot of communication directly from people happen to be within my constituency who have a particular interest in this. I just wonder if the scheme could, if you comment, what approaches have been made nationally.
Debbie?
Thank you, Councillor Patrick. Yes, and following on from our conversation, you're not the only councillor or member of the committee and board to receive those requests. They all seem to come around the same, a very similar time from very similar related parties, and the wording was very similar. And obviously, following what I've passed on to anybody that has had those, is laying out the committee's understanding and commitment to look at climate risk, and setting up the statement of responsible investment principles, and how we look to, and how that gives us now the opportunity to divest if companies are not engaging, and also that we're looking to engage, or take on an engagement specialist to help us engage directly with those managers. So generally we have provided the press and yourselves with a broad statement saying what we're doing and why.
Thank you, Julie. I have no further comment to make except to say that it would. I think it's to our interest and advantage to always have our awareness of the issues duly recorded, so that we cannot in any way be held wanting as far as a response is concerned. Thank you.
Thanks, John. I've got Neil, and then I've got Pat. Councillor Coleman?
No, convener, I don't have a question. Sorry for indicating otherwise.
Oh, sorry. Councillor Reid.
Yes, it's just a comment on COVID. As they say, it's an ill wind that blows no good. And this morning we've probably saved a fortune on carbon emissions by having it in-house. I noticed that we've also taken advantage in terms of administration to get ever closer to a paperless operation. Says here holding an agenda with 200 pages, but that's by the by. I take it that will have a financial effect as well. Our admin costs should reduce quite considerably, I would have thought.
I think right across the board, people are using less paper, and certainly that is, as we try to get as many positives out of COVID as we possibly can, that is definitely one of them. And the climate downtrend in admissions and everything has been recorded as the lowest since 2000, since I think the 1950s. So that, in one way, I suppose our planet is maybe fighting back, you could say. But Debbie, I don't know if you've got any further comment to make.
I think from the administration of the fund perspective, when we get to the pension fund budget, you'll see we're looking at scanning paper files. Excuse me. And getting rid of as much paper as possible to take the lessons from COVID and push them perhaps a bit further than we would have, or faster than we would have done with regard to having scanned images on our pensions system and getting rid of as much paper as we can. So that will help, and then obviously looking into the future about paperless payslips, etc. So there is an agenda to reduce that, certainly over the next couple of years.
Thanks, Debbie.
Tony?
Sorry, Pat. Yep.
It's okay. Just one final comment. I noticed one of the votes that we made was in regard to the Cisco chairman and chief executive getting $30 million in pay in 2019. I assume we voted against that. It's therefore somewhat ironic that we're using Cisco for this meeting.
Yeah. Thanks for that. We've got Tony, and then we've got Councillor Blackwood. So Tony. No. Okay, Councillor Blackwood.
Just a quick question on the cost gap valuation that seems to have been done with some other pension committees, and you indicate there it could show a drop in employer contributions but an increase in employee contributions. That's not going to be very popular with employees. I think that's what was said.
I can reply. Sorry, it's the other way around. So
All right.
at the drop in employee contributions and
Right.
then corresponding increase in employer contributions.
Apologies for that.
That's all right.
Okay.
Okay. Anyone else? Nope. So happy to accept that and move on. Thanks, colleagues. Okay, so we're now moving on to item 9, market review and fund manager performance. I'd ask Bruce to come in, please.
Hello.
Hiya.
Thanks. Yes. I'll keep it fairly brief. You know, the paper talks about global economies, you know, essentially not out of the woods yet, with COVID still ongoing. So expectations are that there'll be a continuation of monetary and fiscal support, which remains, you know, positive for equities and commodities. But you will have noticed that the bond markets have been selling off as they have a tough time as inflation expectations are rising. In section 4 of the report, you can see the allocations are to the strategies, and we have a strategy there allocating the Baillie Gifford a portfolio across the different policy groups. The returns are in section 5. It's already been mentioned that the funding level is probably up since March 2020 because of you know, bond yields rising, which is positive in the sense that it lowers the liability, lowers the liabilities, and asset markets have been very strong since then. So I think with that, I will ask for questions on the paper.
Thanks, Bruce. Do you have any questions? No. Okay. Taking back to recommendations. Happy to agree? Yep.
Yep.
Thank you. Agenda item 10. That's just to let people know that obviously we're going into confidential matters now, and the public will be excluded. As we look at any public, the live stream will be stopped. Oh, what time is it? I'm thinking now, does people want to take a 10-minute break? Yeah? Okay. 12 minutes past 11, so we're back here for about 25 past.